So in my last couple of videos, we looked at some of the component movements of Adho Mukha Svanasana, or downward facing dog, and some really simple ways you might work on those component movements to maybe move towards having a downward facing dog pose that's a little bit more comfortable for you. However, it's worth noting that downward facing dog is just a very uncomfortable pose for a lot of people. So if you hate it, you're not alone. And it may just be that downward facing dog pose is not where your body wants to be right now. If you are struggling or suffering in the pose, it is not meant to be that way. That is your body asking you to do something different. And so what I wanted to do today was share a few variations of the pose that are really helpful if you feel pain or strain in downward facing dog. They are also helpful if you don't feel so much pain or strain, but you want to work more on making the component movements of the pose a little bit easier, smoother, stronger, and better. So the first three variations will use a chair. This chair that I have in my office is a little bit narrow on top. I would prefer to have a wider chair. You could also do this with a counter or a dresser or another piece of furniture. I do recommend, if you're using a chair, that you place it against a wall and or on top of a yoga mat to reduce the chance that it's going to slide around when you're doing the pose. You're going to take your arms or your hands onto the back of the chair. And this is where it's really helpful to have a chair that's a little wider so that you can have your arms a little bit wider here. And then I'm going to walk my feet back, maybe bending my knees as I come into a shape that is very similar to downward facing dog. So in this version of chair dog, I am finding that same hip hinge that we did in the video a couple weeks ago, as well as the same shoulder movement. And there's a few options here. So you can change the distance of your feet from the chair, and you can also change how far you come down. So I could have my head lifted quite a bit above my arms, or I could sit back more and bring my head more in between my arms. Either way, this is a version of chair dog that can be really helpful to work on. And as you come in and out, notice that as your hips move, your shoulders move. So there's some coordination and rhythm between the hip and shoulder movement as you come in and out of this version. Okay, the second way to use a chair is very similar, except I'm going to turn the chair around. So now I'm bringing my hands even lower onto the seat of the chair. Everything else is the same here. Just feels a little different. And some people may find they like this version better. Some people may find that this version is a stretch, and it's better to have their hands a little bit higher up. You may find that the version you prefer changes from day to day. The third way to use the chair, I really like this one. You're going to actually sit on the chair itself. So now your legs are going to be fully bent. So if your hamstrings give you trouble, this takes them out of the picture, which can be really lovely. It also helps with the stability of the chair beneath you. It can be a really nice variation for a lot of people. Okay, I'm going to hinge forward at my hips, just as we did in the hip hinge, except now I have some support underneath me, and I'm going to take my hands up to the wall. So now I can slide the hands up higher. I can bring my head in between my hands, or I can be less hinged further back. I can play with hugging in between my upper thighs and my lower belly here. And you can adjust the distance that your chair is from the wall to find the variation of this pose that feels the best for you. That could be a really lovely place to just play with the component movements and see how they feel in your body. The last variation you can do anywhere you have a little bit of wall space. And for this one, I'm going to take my hands onto the wall. So as I stand with my hands on the wall, I'm a little bit more in a plank pose type shape. And then as I walk my feet back a little bit and find some hinging at my hips and some movement at my shoulders, I start to approach wall dog. Now, as I'm coming into wall dog, I am sitting back a little bit, bending my knees, coming back into almost a chair pose shape with my lower body, so that I can really feel that hip hinge starting to happen. And I'm finding the coordination between the shoulder movement and the hip movement here. Then you can hold. Notice what it feels like to hold, maybe hugging in again a little bit between the upper thighs and the lower belly. Maybe breathing a little bit into the back of the rib cage. And so those variations can be really great places to explore the component movements of downward facing dog, as well as find many of the benefits of being in this shape without hopefully having to struggle quite so much as doing this pose sometimes demands. If you explore these variations, I'd love to hear which one is your favorite, which ones you had trouble with, anything else you'd love to share about your experience, I'd love to hear it. And I hope that this is helpful for having a more comfortable and happy downward facing dog pose.